So in our previous video, we discussed about, or we implemented the functionality of adding a new post which could have multiple categories. So we can select multiple categories and add a new post. And in this video, we are going to be discussing about how we can implement the edit functionality of a post, so that whenever we want to edit a certain post, then we should have the categories pre-selected which are already been selected. So all the values all the options that we select while creating a post should be pre-selected while editing a certain post. So in this video we will be implementing that functionality. So without any further delays, let's start coding. So in our previous video, what we did was we created a file for creating the post, that is create.plate.php. and in this video what I'll do is I'll just copy this create.plate.php file and create a new file, that is edit.blade.php, in order to edit a certain post. And what we need to do is we need to change these values, and the action for this will be post.update, and let's also send the post ID, and the method will be of type post, and let's also give it a value of post title, and let's also give it a value of we don't need a value here. What we need to do is we need to implement that here. So post description, and for the select option we'll just implement this in a few moments. So let's first create the routes for the edit and update operation. So what I'll do is I'll just copy these two routes and paste it here. So post create should go to post edit, and which will also take a parameter of ID, and this will go to post update, and which will also get the ID parameter. So let's go to our post controller and implement our edit functionality. So what we need to do is we need to find the post with the selected ID with the sent ID. So we need to find the post, and we need to return the view of backend.post.edit and the selected post object, and we'll implement this update functionality in a few moments. And we also need to get all the categories for the edit function. So what we can do is we can grab all the category, so category all, and we also let's send it as categories. So now let's go to our browser and admin post edit with an ID of 1. So our edit functionality is working fine. So in order to pre-select the values that we select while creating a certain post, we need to perform a few number of steps. So I just want to show the documentation first of how we can pre-select the value. So what it is mentioned here is, in order to select the options, we can use a function called val. So if you wanna select the option with the value of 1, what we can do here is we can select that tag and call the function of val, which can have a single value or multiple values. So if you wanna select multiple values, pre-select the multiple values, what we need to do is we need to send an array consisting of the values. So after we call the val function, what we also need to do is we need to call a function called .trigger change in order to notify the JS components that the value has been changed. So the way we'll do that is by first we'll create an array which will consist of all the category IDs, and then we'll call this function which will have all the IDs, and then this function, the trigger change function, in order to notify all the JS components of the Select2 library. So the way we will do that is we'll go to our VS Code, and what we'll do here is we'll first execute a PHP script in order to get all the category ID of a certain post. So the way that we do that is by, what I'll do here is I'll just execute a PHP script and define an array define an empty array. So let's name it category IDs, which will be empty. And in order to fill all the category IDs, what we need to do is we need to loop through each of the post categories. So what I'll do here is, for each post category, so remember that we have access to this post variable, and from that post variable we have a allocant relation called categories, so we can get all the categories of this certain post. So we are looping through all of the post categories, and let's name it as, for a single category, let's name as category. And what we wanna do here is we wanna grab all the category IDs and store it in this array. So the way that we do it in PHP is by, so let's first implement our PHP tag, and what we want to do is we can call a function called array push, and this will take two arguments. The first is the array that we want to push to, so category IDs is our array, and the value that we want to push. So in this case our value will be the category ID. So now it will loop through each of the post categories and store all the category IDs in our category IDs array. And now what we need to do is, our next step is, in our script tag, as mentioned in our documentation, what we can do is we can call this function and then later this function in order to notify the JS components. So let's go to our script tag, and first thing that we'll do is we'll define an JavaScript array, so which will be empty. And then what we'll do is we'll just copy the IDs, or what we'll do is we'll copy the contents of our category IDs, which we have defined in our PHP tag, to our JavaScript array. So the way that we can do that is by, we can mention here as data equal to, and we wanna implement our PHP function. So PHP echo JSON encode, and we want to encode the category IDs. So let's just copy and paste it here. And now what this function is doing here is we are grabbing the category IDs array and then storing all the category IDs array to our JavaScript array, which is named as data. So now what we can do is we can call this function here. So let's just copy it and paste it here. So now what we have is we have a class of type categories. So what I can do is I'll just paste it here, and our val will be of type data, and then it will call the function dot trigger change, which will notify all the JS components that our values have been changed, and which will also notify that which will also cause the options to be selected while loading our page. So whenever our page loads, our script section will execute, so which will first define an empty PHP array and will loop through each of the post categories and as category, and what we will do is we'll store all the category IDs in our category IDs array, and then the next that will happen is it will initialize our Select2 library, which will select our class of categories, and we'll also create an empty array in our JavaScript section. And what we'll do is we'll just store the category IDs which we have defined in our PHP tag to our data array, which we have defined in our JavaScript tag, and we'll just call these two functions in order to specify that our values have been changed. So let's see whether our functionality is working fine or not. So let's go to our browser and just reload our page, and trying to get property ID of non-object. We are getting an error, array push category IDs, category ID. Okay, we have an error here. So we are getting an error at this section, at this position. Okay, we got an error here because we have defined a function, so we need to remove this function and it will loop through each of the post categories, and then we'll get the ID here. So defining a function here was a mistake, so let's save it and again reload our browser, and we are still not getting the pre-selected values. Let's inspect. We don't have any error here. We got a problem here because I checked our pivot table and only the post ID of 3 has associated category ID of 1 and 2, and that's why our values, our options were not pre-selected here. So we can go to the post ID of 3, and now as you can see our post IDs have been pre-selected, so our functionality, everything is working fine here. So, and if you are not sure, I'll just explain everything to you again. So what we are doing here is we have our edit.blade.php file where we we copied all the contents from our create.blade.php, and we are looping through each of these categories as item and displaying our options here. So we have access, we can get all the options, we can get access to all the categories from our category model. And in our script section, what we are doing is we have imported our select2 min.js file, and now what we are doing here is we are initializing a empty array in our PHP section. So we are executing a PHP scripts to initialize an empty array of name as category underscore id. And now in our next step, what we are doing is we are looping through each of the posts categories. So now we'll get all the category IDs belonging to this certain post. So for each post categories as categories, so this single category will grab all the category ID and then store it in our category IDs array. So array push, this takes two arguments. The first one is the array itself and the second one is the value. So we are pushing the category IDs to this array. So now we have a collection, we have an array of category IDs in our category IDs array. Now the next step that we need to do is what we are doing here is we are initializing an empty array in our JavaScript in our script section. So this is a array of data of structure of type JavaScript, and our next step is we are storing all the category IDs. So this is our array of which we define in our PHP script, and then we are encoding this JavaScript array and storing it in our data array, data variable. And the next thing, as mentioned in the documentation, we are sending that value in our .val function. So it takes the parameter of type JavaScript array, and then we are calling the function .trigger change, which will notify the select2 library to prefetch the values that were selected while creating the post model. So this is how the select2 we can implement the select2 library into our Laravel application. And our final step is to implement our update functionality for our post. So let's go to our update function, and let's first grab our post. So our post we would get the ID as a parameter. So let's just call the function called find in order to find the post of the selected ID. And now what we can do is we need to update three parameters here. The first is the title, which will get through the request title. The second is description, which is request description, and and the third parameter is we need to update the post categories. And the way that we can implement that is by, let me just first show you how we created the post categories in our store function. So what we did was we access our categories relationship and call a function called attach, and in our update method what we'll do is we'll call sync method instead of attach. And what it will do is it will just sync the changes from our previous categories, and what it will do is it will remove the IDs that we unselect and also add the category IDs that we select while we edit a certain category. So let's access our eloquent relation with posts categories, and instead of calling attach, what we can do is we can call sync. So it will sync all the request categories IDs to our post model. And after we do that, let's return redirect back with success message of post details updated successfully. And now let's check whether it's working or not. So let's go to our browser and first reload it once, and what I'm going to do is I'll just update the title as updated and select one more category. So we have selected 3 categories, and we can leave that like this, but let's click on add post. So this is basically update post. So now as you can see here, our 3 categories for this post have been updated, but our title is not updated. So let's check it here. So request post title should be request title. Okay, we forgot one thing, that we need to save the post, and now it should work fine. So let's give it updated and remove one category. Okay, we can only give 2 and add post. Okay, our edit functionality is also working fine now, and I hope that you understand how everything is working here. And if you like the content, do subscribe to my channel so that you can stay updated in the future releases of my upcoming videos, and I'll post more Laravel related tutorials in the future. So stay tuned for that, and until the next time, have a great day and see you in the next one.